I should have seen the signs from our wedding day. Celeste stood in the front row wearing white, not quite ivory, not quite cream, but white enough to make a statement. She smiled through the entire ceremony, but her eyes never left my face, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Daniel brushed off my concerns when I mentioned it later. "Mom's just protective," he'd say, wrapping his arms around me in that way that used to make everything else disappear. "She'll come around once she gets to know you better." But months passed, and things only got worse. Every Sunday dinner at their estate became a carefully orchestrated interrogation. Celeste would serve her famous pot roast and ask innocent questions that felt like tiny daggers. "Sarah, dear, tell us about your family's business again." "Oh, that's right. Your father works at the hardware store." The way she said hardware store made it sound like he cleaned sewers for a living. The house Daniel's parents gave us didn't help matters. It was all glass and steel, perched on a hill overlooking the valley like a monument to modern success. Beautiful, sure, but it felt more like a fishbowl than a home. I'd catch neighbors driving by slowly, craning their necks to peer inside. Celeste had made sure everyone in Millbrook knew her son had married well, at least architecturally speaking. She had keys, of course, for emergencies, Daniel had explained when he handed them over without asking me. Those emergencies seemed to happen every few days. I'd come home from work at the local library to find her rearranging my kitchen cabinets or watering plants I didn't remember buying. She'd always have some excuse ready. She was dropping off homemade jam, or she'd seen a package on the porch and worried about thieves. The worst part was how she'd touch things. My things. She'd pick up books from my nightstand, flip through them with this little frown, then set them down in different spots. Once I found her in our bedroom, folding my underwear with the kind of precision that made my skin crawl. When I asked what she was doing, she just smiled and said she was helping with laundry. But I hadn't left any laundry out. I tried talking to Daniel about boundaries, but he'd get this distant look in his eyes. "She raised me alone after Dad died," he'd remind me. "Cut her some slack. This is how she shows love." I wanted to ask if love was supposed to feel like surveillance, but I bit my tongue. Marriage was about compromise, right? The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I'd run to the grocery store to grab ingredients for dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread. The kind of simple meal that reminded me of home, of Mom calling us kids in from the backyard when the streetlights came on. I was gone maybe 40 minutes. Tops. When I pulled into our driveway, Celeste's silver Mercedes was parked in my usual spot. Not unusual, but something felt different. The front door was slightly ajar, and I could hear movement upstairs. My heart started racing for reasons I couldn't explain. I called out as I climbed the stairs, but got no response. I found her in Daniel's study, standing behind his desk with a manila folder in her hands. The afternoon sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, made her look almost ghostly, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Her face was flushed, her usually perfect silver hair slightly mussed. She looked guilty, but also triumphant, like a detective who'd finally cracked a case. "What's this?" she demanded, holding up the folder. Her voice was shaking, but not with fear. With rage. Pure, undiluted rage that seemed to fill the entire room. I'd never seen her lose composure before, and it was terrifying. I stepped closer, trying to see what had upset her so much, but she clutched the folder to her chest like it contained state secrets. That's when I realized she'd been going through Daniel's private papers. Again. But this time, she'd found something that changed everything. "Answer me." Celeste's voice cracked like a whip across the study. She thrust the folder toward me, her hands trembling so violently I thought she might drop it. "What is this divorce settlement? What are you planning?" My mouth went dry. Divorce settlement? I hadn't even thought about divorce, let alone planned one. Daniel and I had our problems, sure, but we were working through them, weren't we? She opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. Even from across the room, I could see letterhead from Morrison & Associates, the law firm that handled all of the family's legal matters. My name was typed at the top in bold letters, followed by Daniel's. The words, "dissolution of marriage," seemed to leap off the page. I moved closer, my legs feeling like they might give out. "Celeste, I don't know what that is." I've never seen those papers before in my life. Don't lie to me. She slammed the folder down on Daniel's desk, sending his coffee mug rattling. It's all here in black and white. You want everything. The house, his trust fund, his share of the family business. Everything we've worked 3 generations to build. I reached for the documents, but she snatched them away. Let me see them, please. If my name is on there, I have a right to know what they say. She held them out like evidence in a murder trial. My eyes scanned the pages quickly, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. But certain phrases jumped out at me like neon signs. 50% of all marital assets. Sole ownership of property located at 1247 Hillcrest Drive. Division of Patterson Family Trust Holdings. The numbers made my head spin. I knew Daniel's family had money, but seeing it laid out in cold legal terms was overwhelming. We were talking about millions of dollars, properties I'd never even heard of, investments that could set someone up for life. And according to these papers, I was trying to take all of it. But the signature at the bottom made my blood run cold. It looked like mine. The same loopy S in Sarah. The way I always crossed my T's a little too high. But I'd never signed those papers. I'd never even seen them before this moment. I didn't write this, I whispered. But even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how weak they sounded. How guilty. Celeste laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course you didn't write it, dear. You had lawyers write it for you. Very expensive lawyers by the look of it. Tell me, where did a librarian get the money for Morrison and Associates? They charge more per hour than you make in a month. She had a point, and we both knew it. I made decent money at the library, but nothing close to what those downtown lawyers charged. Daniel had always handled our finances, said it was easier that way. I had access to our joint checking account for groceries and household expenses, but the bigger financial picture had always been his domain. Maybe Daniel knows something about this, I said, grasping for any explanation that made sense. Maybe it's just a draft, or a template, or something his lawyers prepared for their files. My son would never, she started, then stopped. Her face went through a series of emotions. Anger, confusion, then something that looked almost like fear. Daniel wouldn't keep secrets from me. We tell each other everything. But even as she said it, I could see doubt creeping into her eyes, the same doubt that had been growing in my own heart for months. How well did any of us really know Daniel? He was charming, successful, loving when it suited him. But there were parts of his life that felt off limits. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Phone calls he took in private. I thought about all the times I'd found Celeste going through our things. All the boundary violations I'd attributed to a controlling mother-in-law. What if she'd been looking for something specific? What if she'd suspected Daniel was hiding something long before I ever appeared on the scene? The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the study. In the growing darkness, the documents seemed to take on a life of their own, taunting us both with questions neither of us could answer. Who had prepared them? When? And most importantly, why? Celeste carefully placed the papers back in the folder, her movements suddenly precise and controlled. The wild anger from moments before had been replaced by something harder, more calculating. We need to talk to Daniel, she said quietly. Tonight. And Sarah? She looked directly at me for the first time since I'd found her. If you're playing games with my family, you'll regret it. Daniel walked through the front door at exactly 6:30, same as always. His footsteps echoed off the hardwood floors as he hung his coat in the closet and called out his usual greeting. Honey, I'm home. Something smells good. But nothing was cooking. Celeste and I had been sitting in the living room for 2 hours, the manila folder between us like a loaded gun. Daniel, we need to talk. Celeste's voice carried from the living room, stopping him mid-stride. I heard him pause in the hallway, probably checking his reflection in the mirror like he always did. When he appeared in the doorway, he looked perfectly composed. Tie loosened just enough to seem relaxed, sleeves rolled up from a productive day at the office. Mom, I didn't expect to see you here. His eyes moved between us, taking in the tension that filled the room like smoke. Is everything okay? Celeste stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She'd spent the past 2 hours transforming from the frantic woman I'd found in the study into something more dangerous. a prosecutor with a case to make. Your wife has something she'd like to explain to you. I started to protest, to remind her that I had nothing to explain because I hadn't done anything. But Daniel held up a hand. What's going on? He settled into his leather armchair, the one that faced both the couch and the fireplace, the one that commanded the room. Celeste opened the folder and placed the documents on the coffee table, spreading them out like a card dealer revealing a winning hand. I found these in your study. Divorce papers with Sarah's signature, demanding half of everything you own. Daniel leaned forward, his expression unreadable as he scanned the pages. I watched his face carefully, looking for surprise, confusion, anger, any reaction that would prove he was as shocked as I was. But his features remained perfectly neutral, like he was reading the morning newspaper instead of documents that could destroy our marriage. The silence stretched on, until I couldn't stand it anymore. Daniel, I swear to you, I've never seen those papers before in my life. I don't know how they got there or who prepared them, but it wasn't me. He picked up the first page, examining it closely, then the second. When he got to the signature page, he actually smiled. A small, almost sad expression that made my stomach drop. Sarah's telling the truth, he said quietly. She didn't prepare these documents. Celeste's face brightened with vindication. I knew it. Someone's trying to frame her to make our family look bad. We need to call the police, file a report. This is identity theft, fraud, maybe even extortion. No, Mom. Daniel set the papers down carefully, aligning them with the edge of the coffee table. Sarah didn't prepare these because I did. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications hit me. Celeste made a choking sound, her hand flying to her throat. You what? She whispered. Daniel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the valley below. From where I sat, I could see his reflection in the glass. Calm, almost relieved. I had Morrison draw up the papers 3 weeks ago. I forged Sarah's signature using samples from our joint bank account applications. Then I put them in my desk drawer, knowing you'd eventually find them. But why? The question came out as barely more than a breath. I couldn't understand what I was hearing. Couldn't process why my husband would do something so cruel and elaborate. He turned around, and for the first time since I'd known him, Daniel looked completely honest. No charm, no deflection, just raw truth. Because I needed you both to see what was really happening here. Mom, you've been violating our privacy for months. Going through our things, questioning Sarah's motives, treating her like she's some kind of gold digger. I tried talking to you, tried setting boundaries, but you wouldn't listen. Celeste's face crumpled. Daniel, I was just trying to protect you. After what happened with Jennifer, and then Rachel before her, I couldn't bear to see you hurt again. And Sarah. He looked directly at me, his eyes filled with something that might have been apology, or might have been challenge. You've been so focused on Mom's behavior that you stopped trusting me. Every conversation became about her. Every problem in our marriage got blamed on her interference. I needed to know if you'd fight for us, or just assume the worst. I felt like I'd been slapped. So, you created fake divorce papers and let your mother find them? You let us both believe. I couldn't even finish the sentence. The betrayal was too complete, too calculated. I needed to force the issue, he said simply. Mom needed to see how far her suspicions would take her. And you needed to see that I'm on your side, even when it means going against my own family. Celeste had gone very still, her face pale as chalk. You used me, she said quietly. You used both of us. This isn't protection, Daniel. This is manipulation. Maybe, he admitted. But it worked, didn't it? Now we all know where we stand. Now we can move forward with honesty instead of assumptions. I stared at him. This man I'd married. This stranger who'd orchestrated an elaborate psychological experiment using the 2 women closest to him as test subjects. The worst part wasn't the deception itself. It was how proud he looked, how satisfied with his own cleverness. The house felt different after that night. Not just quiet, empty, like all the air had been sucked out of it. Celeste left without saying goodbye, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. The sound of her Mercedes pulling out of the driveway seemed to echo for hours afterward. Daniel went to bed like nothing had happened. He brushed his teeth, changed into his pajamas, and kissed my forehead the same way he had every night for 2 years. "Everything's going to be better now," he whispered against my hair. "You'll see." But I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing, wondering who the man beside me really was. The Daniel I'd married was thoughtful, yes, but this level of calculation felt like something else entirely. How long had he been planning this? How many other situations had he orchestrated without me knowing? I kept thinking about small moments from our relationship that suddenly felt different. The way he'd suggested I quit my job at the downtown library to work at the smaller branch in Millbrook. "You'll be happier closer to home," he'd said. But now I wondered if he'd wanted me isolated, dependent on him and his family's money. The way he'd insisted on handling all our finances because he was better with numbers. The way he'd given his mother keys to our house without asking me first. Had any of our relationship been real, or had I been living inside someone else's carefully constructed plan? The next morning, Daniel made coffee and scrambled eggs like he did every Saturday. He hummed while he cooked, that little tune he always hummed when he was in a good mood. When he set my plate in front of me, he smiled like he expected me to smile back, like we were celebrating something. "I called Mom this morning," he said, settling into his chair across from me. "She's not ready to talk yet, but she will be. She just needs time to process everything." I stared at my eggs, watching the steam rise from them. Process what exactly? That her son set her up? That he made her look like a fool? That she was wrong about you? His voice was gentle, patient, like he was explaining something to a child. "Sarah, she's been suspicious of every woman I've ever brought home. She drove away Jennifer. She made Rachel so uncomfortable she broke up with me over text. I couldn't let her do that to us. So you decided to traumatize her instead." Daniel set down his fork and reached across the table for my hand. I pulled away before he could touch me. "I know it seems harsh," he said, "but sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind. Sometimes people can't see their own behavior until you hold up a mirror." The casual way he said it made my skin crawl. Like manipulating people was just another problem-solving technique, no different from troubleshooting a computer or fixing a leaky faucet. I excused myself from breakfast and spent the day at the library, even though it was my day off. Being surrounded by books felt safe, predictable. Books didn't lie or manipulate or test you. They just existed, honest in their intentions. When I came home that evening, I found Daniel in his study, reading through some work files. The manila folder was gone, probably shredded or burned, but I could still see it in my mind, could still feel the weight of those fake documents and what they represented. "How many times have you done something like this?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up from his papers, genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "Manipulated a situation to get the outcome you wanted. Set up elaborate tests to prove your point. Made people dance to your tune without them knowing they were performing." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "I prefer to think of it as being proactive. Most people just react to problems after they've already gotten out of control. I like to solve them before they become unsolvable. By lying to people, by creating situations where the truth has to come out." He closed his file and swiveled his chair to face me fully. "Sarah, my father taught me that the most dangerous problems are the ones people refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes you have to force acknowledgement." I thought about his father, who died when Daniel was 15. From what I'd heard, he'd been a brilliant businessman, the kind of man who could spot an opportunity or a threat from miles away. Maybe that's where Daniel had learned this calculating approach to human relationships. Maybe it had been passed down like a family heirloom, polished and perfected through generations. That night, I dreamed about the fake divorce papers. In the dream, they were real, and I was signing them with relief instead of horror. I woke up feeling guilty and confused, unsure what that said about me or my marriage. Over the following days, Daniel's prediction proved partially correct. Things were quieter without Celeste's constant visits. No more surprise drop-ins, no more rearranged cabinets or unsolicited advice. But the silence felt ominous rather than peaceful, like the calm before a storm that might never come. I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. The way Daniel always seemed to know exactly what to say to get his way. how he could make people feel grateful for doing things they didn't really want to do. The way he collected information about everyone around him, their weaknesses, their desires, their pressure points, and filed it away for future use. 10 days later, my phone rang while I was shelving returns in the biography section. Celeste's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. We hadn't spoken since that awful night, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear whatever she had to say. But curiosity won out. "Hello, Celeste." "Sarah." Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow, less commanding. "I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this afternoon. There are things we need to discuss." We met at Murphy's Diner on Main Street, a place that felt neutral enough for both of us. It was the kind of local spot where truckers sat next to church ladies, where the coffee was strong and the pie was homemade. Celeste looked out of place among the checkered tablecloths and vinyl booths, but she'd chosen it specifically, I realized, somewhere public where neither of us could make a scene. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, like she was trying to steal its warmth. She'd aged in the past week and a half. The careful makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her usually perfect hair looked like she'd been running her fingers through it. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." The waitress brought me coffee without being asked, the kind of small-town service that came from working the same customers for 20 years. We sat in awkward silence until she left, both of us staring into our mugs like they might contain answers. "I owe you an apology," Celeste finally said. "Not just for what happened in your house, but for everything. The way I've treated you since the beginning. The suspicion, the constant questioning, the invasion of your privacy. It was wrong. I'd expected anger, maybe accusations, but not this quiet admission of guilt. Celeste, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Vulnerability. I've been thinking about what Daniel said, about Jennifer and Rachel. He was right. I did drive them away, but not because I thought they were after his money. She paused, seeming to gather courage for whatever came next. I drove them away because I was terrified of being replaced, of becoming irrelevant in my son's life. After my husband died, Daniel and I became so close, maybe too close. He was 15, trying to be the man of the house, and I leaned on him in ways I probably shouldn't have. The honesty in her voice was startling. This wasn't the polished, controlling woman I'd known for 2 years. This was someone's mother, admitting to mistakes that had shaped her son in ways she was only now beginning to understand. "When he brought you home," she continued, "I saw how happy you made him, how relaxed he was around you, and instead of being grateful, I was jealous, threatened. So I looked for reasons not to trust you, convinced myself you had ulterior motives. But you were still right to be suspicious," I said quietly. "Just not about me." Celeste's coffee mug trembled slightly in her hands. "You mean Daniel?" We both knew what we were talking about without saying it directly. The elaborate setup, the forged documents, the psychological manipulation disguised as problem-solving. The realization that the person we both loved was capable of orchestrating such a calculated deception. "He learned it from his father," she said, so quietly I almost missed it. "Robert was brilliant, but he saw people as chess pieces. Everything was strategy to him. Business, relationships, family dynamics. He'd create situations to test people's loyalty, to expose their weaknesses. He called it managing human resources." The phrase made my stomach turn. "And you let him?" "I participated in it." Her voice cracked slightly. "I told myself it was protection, that we were just being careful with our family's interests. But really, we were controlling everyone around us, making sure they fit into our vision of how things should be." She pulled a tissue from her purse and dabbed at her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. "After Robert died, I thought Daniel would be different, gentler. He was so young, so sweet. But I can see now that I just trained him to be a better version of his father. More subtle, more charming, more effective. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Daniel's need to control situations, his ability to manipulate people while making them feel grateful for it, his casual approach to deception. It wasn't just personality quirks. It was learned behavior, passed down through generations like a twisted family tradition. "Sarah, I need you to understand something." Celeste leaned forward, her voice urgent. "What Daniel did to us, with those papers, that wasn't love. That wasn't protection. That was control, pure and simple. He wanted to prove he could manipulate both of us simultaneously, and he succeeded." I thought about the past week, about Daniel's satisfaction with how everything had played out, about his casual admission that he'd done what was necessary to force the truth, about the way he'd gone back to normal afterward, as if orchestrating psychological warfare was just another Tuesday evening. "The scary part," Celeste continued, "is how good he is at it, how he makes it seem reasonable, even noble. Robert was the same way. He could convince you that his manipulation was actually kindness, that his control was actually care. We sat in silence for a while, two women who'd been played against each other by someone who claimed to love us both. The afternoon sun slanted through the diner windows, and the normal sounds of small-town life continued around us. Conversations about weather and local gossip, the clink of silverware against plates. "What do we do now?" I asked finally. Celeste smiled, but it was sad and tired. "I don't know. But I do know that pretending this is normal, that this is how families should function, that's not an option anymore. Not for me." I drove home from the diner with Celeste's words echoing in my head. The familiar route through Millbrook's tree-lined streets felt different somehow, like I was seeing everything through new eyes. The perfect lawns, the expensive cars and driveways, the whole carefully maintained facade of suburban success. It all looked hollow now, like a movie set designed to hide what was really happening behind closed doors. Daniel was in the kitchen when I walked in, chopping vegetables for dinner. He looked up with that warm smile that had first attracted me to him at the library fundraiser 3 years ago. Back then, I'd thought it was genuine affection. Now I wondered if it was just another tool in his arsenal, calibrated to get the response he wanted. "How was your day?" he asked, the same question he asked every evening. But tonight I heard the slight emphasis on your, the way he was fishing for information without seeming to pry. "Fine," I said, hanging my jacket on the back of a chair. "I had coffee with your mother." His knife paused mid-chop, just for a fraction of a second. Then he resumed cutting, his movements perfectly controlled. "How is she? Still processing everything?" The casual way he asked made my skin crawl, like Celeste was a computer that needed time to run an update, not a person who'd been emotionally devastated by her son's betrayal. "She's hurt, Daniel. Confused. She doesn't understand why you felt the need to manipulate her like that." "I didn't manipulate her." His voice remained calm, reasonable. "I created a situation where her true feelings could be revealed. There's a difference." "Is there?" I leaned against the counter, studying his profile as he worked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you used both of us as props in some twisted psychology experiment." Daniel set down the knife and turned to face me fully. "Sarah, I know this is difficult to understand, but sometimes love requires difficult choices. My mother was never going to respect our marriage as long as she suspected your motives. And you were never going to feel secure in our relationship as long as you thought I wasn't willing to stand up to her." The explanation sounded rehearsed, like he'd been practicing it in his head for days. Maybe he had. Maybe he'd anticipated this conversation the same way he'd anticipated everything else, planning his responses like a chess master thinking 5 moves ahead. "So you decided to traumatize us both to prove a point?" "I decided to solve a problem before it destroyed our marriage." His tone sharpened slightly, the first crack in his patient facade. "And it worked, didn't it? Mom finally sees you for who you really are, and you finally see that I'm willing to fight for us." But that wasn't what I saw at all. What I saw was a man who treated the people closest to him like variables in an equation, to be manipulated and controlled until they produced the desired outcome. What I saw was my father-in-law's legacy living on in his son, dressed up in charm and modern psychology, but fundamentally unchanged. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I found myself walking through the house, looking at our possessions with new eyes. The expensive furniture that had come from Daniel's family, the artwork that Celeste had helped us choose, the whole carefully curated life that I'd thought we'd built together but now realized had been designed by someone else entirely. I ended up in Daniel's study, staring at the desk drawer where he'd planted those fake divorce papers. The drawer was empty now, but I could still feel the weight of what had been there. Not just the documents themselves, but what they represented. The lengths Daniel was willing to go to control the narrative of our lives. Over the following weeks, I started making small changes. I opened my own savings account at a different bank, one where Daniel didn't have connections. I started keeping copies of important documents in a safety deposit box he didn't know about. I began paying more attention to our finances, asking questions about investments and property holdings that I'd previously left entirely in his hands. If Daniel noticed these changes, he didn't mention them. He continued his routine of cheerful normalcy, acting like our marriage had been strengthened rather than shattered by his grand manipulation. He even suggested we plan a vacation to celebrate getting past all the family drama, but I couldn't get past it. Every conversation felt scripted, every gesture calculated. When he brought me flowers, I wondered what response he was trying to elicit. When he suggested we try that new restaurant in town, I questioned whether he was genuinely interested in spending time with me, or just maintaining the appearance of a happy marriage. The worst part was how well he played the role of the devoted husband. He was attentive without being clingy, supportive without being condescending, romantic without being overwhelming. If I hadn't known about the fake divorce papers, if I hadn't seen behind the curtain of his careful orchestration, I might have believed we were happier than ever. But I had seen. And once you know someone is capable of that level of deception, that casual manipulation of the people they claim to love, you can't unknow it. Trust, I realized, wasn't just broken. It was revealed as an illusion that had never really existed in the first place. Spring turned to summer, and I found myself making more and more excuses to be away from the house. Extra hours at the library, coffee dates with colleagues, long walks through the state park on weekends. I needed space to think, to figure out who I was outside of Daniel's carefully managed version of our life together. One morning in late July, I woke up before dawn and knew with absolute certainty what I had to do. Daniel was still sleeping, one arm flung across the space where I'd been lying. He looked peaceful, innocent even, but I'd learned not to trust appearances, especially his. I packed a single bag with essentials, clothes, documents, the small jewelry box my grandmother had left me. Everything else could be replaced. Everything else belonged to the life I was leaving behind, the life that had never really been mine to begin with.